This is the area inside the deer fence. The deer fence is in an area of about an acre around the house, so we don't have to fence everything. This is the waterfall area and the wall and the extended wall. And that area goes down to what we call the greenhouse pond. Called the greenhouse pond because of the greenhouse up here on the upper deck of the house, which overlooks it. And 5 of the most important trees in the Arboretum are located in the area between this patio wall and the bridge over the greenhouse pond. And we'll walk down that way and take a look at it. Be careful with this little lift, you don't go falling. I'll begin talking again now. This stairway leads to the lower patio next to the greenhouse pond. And especially in the morning when the sun comes in from this direction, it highlights the trees that we're looking at. Now, the one with the double top on the right is a false cypress from the east coast called Camacypris thioides. It's also known as an Atlantic white cedar. Remembering that the term cedar is not a scientific term, it's a lumberman's term, and only refers to scale-like leaves that lay on the stems. The more compact but taller tree to the left is the west coast false cypress, Camacypris lawsoniana, Port Orford cedar, another name. Now hidden behind the rhododendrons here is a 2.5-foot pine log from a tree that fell and was left. Now that tree has formed a nurse log, and all kinds of things are reproducing on that log which would not reproduce if it weren't for the log. The largest one is this Atlantic white cedar, which is a seedling of that one. And it only is there because it was able to reproduce on that log. Walk down this way. This weeping tree is an Alaskan yellow cedar, which was once thought to be a false cypress, making 3 for North America, but it's now been shown not to be a false cypress, but to be in its own genus. It's not either a false cypress or a true cypress, and so they've invented a new generic name for it called Calotropis. And so it's Calotropis nucleatensis pendula, and that's the normal form in which it takes in the wild. It grows on the west coast up towards Alaska and Oregon and Washington. We'll walk down the steps to the lower patio. When the sun comes in the morning, it illuminates this side of the trees and the greenhouse bridge. In the greenhouse pond, we have various water lilies. The pink ones are over there. They're not out yet because the sun isn't bright enough. There are red ones which are not out off that point. Some of the others are yellow. The yellow ones are native, the others are imported. And the muskrats tend to eat all the imported ones and leave the native ones alone. Across the pond there is a tulip tree. Now that tree was planted no bigger than this stick. In the first winter it died right back to the root system and then re-sprouted. And there it is. It's already produced seedlings, one of which is probably 25 feet tall in the back there. Now, the characteristics of these two fault cypress in North America, one from the East Coast and one from the West Coast, are well displayed by these two specimens. The East Coast ones, the Phaeoides, in the nursery trade doesn't have a lot of play because it's not considered to be as pretty. But this particular specimen really shows that it is quite a beautiful tree. It has a feathery appearance and good color, kind of a gray, blue-green, and is much broader than the normal growth form. And that's not just because it lost its top, it's broader anyway. And the West Coast one is very compact. Now, the West Coast tree is endangered in its normal environment on the West Coast because of a root rot. But it can live a long time and can grow well over 200 feet tall. It's unusual to get a good specimen to live in this climate of the East. And when I bought this specimen, it was delivered by mail order in an envelope from Georgia, and it lived. And I didn't know any better, so I kept getting others, which all died in the first winter, until one year I discovered a Japanese fault cypress that was a yellow form, and everything on it that was not completely yellow died. So then I thought maybe the yellow's hardier in the fault cypress, so I ordered golden showers, and it lived. And if you'll notice, that tree, at least in the sunlight, has a slight gold tip. And that's the reason that it's hardier and is doing quite well, has never exhibited any cold damage. I'm waiting for it too to reproduce on the log. It hasn't happened yet. There are tens of thousands of cones on the Atlantic white cedar. There are much fewer cones on the Port Orford cedar, and they're way up near the top, so they're much harder to get to. Whereas on this specimen of the Atlantic white cedar or the East Coast fault cypress, they're even on the lowest branches, and they just are quite prominent. Now, right here on the weeping Alaskan yellow cedar, you can see their cones forming. Now, off the upper part of the greenhouse pond, there are a number of northern white cedars, which are arborvitae, Thuya occidentalis. But nestled amongst them is about a 9 to 10 foot high Sitka spruce, which I personally brought back from a nurse log on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. There were 10,000 seedlings. It was one of them, and it has done extremely well. Is retaining its needles, had no winter dieback. Now, the Sitka spruce becomes the largest spruce of the spruce species, and can live almost 1,000 years. Not that this one will do so, but it's located in an appropriately moist area with its head able to get up into the sky, so we hope it'll do well. Now, another tree to highlight is an Engelmann spruce, and it's located between these two fault cypress. One is taller. And that was planted as a small seedling, no bigger than my hand. Done quite well. And it grows up between the two. Engelmann spruce are more narrow growing than some spruce. And one of the two main spruces in the west, the other one being the Colorado spruce. Now, one of the characteristics of the Engelmann spruce is that it can tolerate more shade and does better if it has more moisture. Now, from this point, we're going to follow this narrow trail down to the bridge. And on the way, we're going to see a California incense cedar. Calocedrus decurrens. It's also known as an Oregon cedar. Again, it's not a cedar. It's its own separate genus. That's the specimen. Not my oldest one, but it's the one that's growing the fastest and in the best form. Now the next tree we're going to point out is a Carolina hemlock. The commonest hemlock in the east is the eastern hemlock called Suga canadensis. And that's Caroliniana. Now the difference is that the Carolina hemlock doesn't get as big. It grows slower. Its needles, instead of being horizontal, come out completely around the stem. Its cones are small, like the Canadian hemlock, but they, instead of staying closed, they open up and form a minute ornament. We'll take a look. There are the little cones hanging on the tree that have opened up. On the Canadian hemlock, they tend to stay closed. Here on the ground are a form of mushroom called Suleus, and they tend to grow on the roots of pine trees and ultimately can even kill the pine. They are not poisonous. Called Suleus. may want to get another look at these three trees from this angle, looking that way. This is a form of arborvitae. Fuchsia occidentalis with a slight gold tip. Walk away through this brushy area, so stand here and get a picture of that crab apple. So you can see the fruit. You get where I am. I'll go over here. Okay. Now over here is a fruiting crab apple. It was a naturally occurring seedling on the property, which I moved to this area. And this has been a particularly good year for apple crop. So it's loaded with a slightly bigger than some of the crab apples. And if we took the time to pick them, I'm sure we could make a good crab apple jelly out of it. Now, remember that the motto of the Arboretum is trees in a natural environment. And one of the attributes of a natural environment is rotting material from trees like logs. Now this is an example of what happens when you allow nature to do its own thing. Here is a pine log covered with moss, rotting slowly away, covered with a fungus from this year. But the important thing to look at is this, which is a paperbark birch, which is a native tree, which has only reproduced here because of that log. It reproduced itself on the log. And the only place where I've seen these white birch reproduce is on stumps or logs. And the same is true of rhododendrons. They only reproduce where there's rotting log material. I'll show you one over here. Right there is a rhododendron growing out of a black cherry log. Now the black cherry rots very slowly, so it can be there quite a number of years. Here is a specimen of Magnolia grandifolia, which is an evergreen magnolia that lives in the south but at least two varieties are here which tolerate this temperature and climate. And this is called Bracken's Brown. It gets its name from the fact that the undersurface has this brown, fuzzy appearance. I don't know if you can see that tree with the double trunks, but that is another one. I'll talk about
this
it.
guy's blocking.
Yeah. See the one with the two trunks coming up over there? That's what I want to show.
Okay. Yeah, let's move over.
And I don't know whether you can
I can
get
see
a
it
good
now.
look at it or not.
Yeah.
But I'll start talking about it.
Okay.
Now over there, with two trunks, is another Magnolia grandifolia called Edithborg. It originally had one trunk, and it died back and produced two trunks. Sometimes when trees are marginally hardy, they will do better with more than one trunk. But in general, that tree has no dieback. Neither of these magnolias have gotten old enough to produce blooms. Can you get through? You need a guide. I'll step over this one. I'm going to show you that and talk about it. Now, here's a fairly large specimen of Fraser fir, which is a cousin of the balsam fir, but grows in the more southern area of the Appalachian. Here's a large healing star, which began as a significant buck rub in the fall, years ago before the deer fence was around this area. And it damaged about half of the bark system of the tree, but with growth and protection by the deer fence, this tree is going to heal it so completely that in subsequent years you will not even recognize what it is. It demonstrates the enormous recuperative powers that trees have. Now, I don't know if you can get a better look. That's that Sitka. We've now progressed to the area where that Sitka spruce was planted, and it's about 10, 11 feet tall, and from this angle you can get a closer view of it. get a picture looking that way from over here. And you might want to, for instance, poke through there enough so you aren't obstructed. You might get a good view from over there too, but right here might be the best. You can come here too, and you might find that this is better, but you don't know till you look at them both.
Get it over the
You jiggle too much now. Okay? Now you may want to take a picture of these fruit. This is a natural seedling, and I have many of them, of a European spindle tree. It's a kind of euonymus, which produces this beautiful fall fruit, which is a seed which is quite red, followed by this rosy colored covering. I don't know if you can get a close-up view of it. Now we have an enormous collection of hosta, and they are self-seeding. Right here in the path there's 1, 2, 3, 4 seedlings. Now over here we have 2 woods peonies. They have a single type of bloom. And what you're looking at are the seed pods. Now I think the seed pods are the blue things. I'm not quite sure. I don't know enough about it to know the scientific distinction between what the red is and the blue, but they certainly are pretty fruit. And here on the ground in front are a dozen or more hosta seedlings. Now, there's one other thing to show here. If you look out across the pond, there's an arborvitae with cones on it in the middle. It's at the base of that where one of that nurse log was that had the paper bark birch on it. But just to the left of the arborvitae is an evergreen magnolia called Magnolia virginiana Henry Hicks. And it is the best Magnolia virginiana that I have in terms of keeping its leaves and retaining an evergreen status. It's also fruited heavily this year. And it's also growing more rapidly than some of my others. You can even get a close-up probably from here.
Yeah, let me make sure I'm getting the right one, the taller one.
Well, you see the arborvitae.
Yeah.
And then just to its left is an evergreen that looks like a rhododendron type tree. Mm-hmm. So you can zoom right in on it up close. Now we're coming back to where we started. We've been around the greenhouse pond. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
Awesome. Now, maybe a little. You do tours back here too, right? Because not many people know that.
But I pretty much have to bring the people back here.
Yeah.
Even though they can come back, they're a little reluctant to get in the gate.
By request. Okay.
But the thing to point out is how these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trees are located between this wall and that bridge, and they're some of the more important trees in the place. In addition to that, and there are others. A lot of things are important, but I mean.
Great. Awesome.
But this is a, you know, I could spend almost 2 hours here slowly going through it, showing you things.
Gotta come do the tour at Pine Hollow Arboretum.
What's that?
I said you have to come do the tour.
Yeah, right. And the tour isn't, even a 2-hour tour is not going to show you everything.
Yeah.